Thinking in bits and sats. Bitcoin as your personal unit of account. What is ascesis? It is mastery of both the philosophical and the practical. It is the contemplation of uh, the transcendental, but balanced by a mastery of everyday life. In the last couple videos, they've been highly philosophical, and with this one, I plan to bring things back to earth to be a little more practical, grounded. And in that vein, I would like to discuss the topic of thinking in terms of bits and sats, thinking in terms of Bitcoin as your personal unit of account, the measure against which you value everything, economically at least. Now, obviously, you don't measure everything in life against the metric, the unit of account that is Bitcoin. You do not measure relationships, you do not measure memories. But in terms of economics, I want to introduce to you the idea of adopting the mindset of measuring in units denominated by Bitcoin. Now, this may seem a little strange or difficult at first, but you already do it. It's already second nature to you, except you do it with fiat. You think in dollars or euros or pounds, and you do it without even realizing that you do it. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is that which you exist within, which you do not even realize that you exist within. It is a mindset that you have so deeply rooted in your psyche that you don't even realize that it is rooted in your psyche. It is the water that surrounds the goldfish that the goldfish is not even aware of. You think in terms of dollars. You think in terms of fiat. You measure everything against it. Your labor, your savings, the price of fuel, groceries. Everything is denominated in dollars. Everything is compared to this universal measure of value that is fiat. You already do it. However, obviously the problem here is that fiat is not a stable measure of value. It is not one to be trusted. It is a measuring stick that expands and contracts without any warning, without any way of anticipating how it's going to do so. And in the last little while, we've seen that. We have seen incredible levels of inflation, of distortion, manipulation, the supply of fiat, which is just another way of saying they are lengthening the measuring stick. They've taken a ruler, which is supposed to be a foot long or 30 centimeters long, and they're adding units of measure to it for their own convenience because it gives them certain advantages. But of course, what happens to the world when carpenters have to adjust to the fluctuation of their measuring tape? And of course, this example appears to be absurd, and it is. It's absurd for a carpenter to have to rely upon a unit of measure that is constantly fluctuating. But it is even more absurd for an entire economy, for an entire society, civilization, to be rooted upon this economic unit of account that cannot be trusted. Now, let's compare this insane Dr. Seuss Alice in Wonderland version of money, a universal unit of account that is just constantly fluctuating and, in the case of fiat, over the long term, massively inflating. Let's compare that to Bitcoin. Bitcoin will only ever have 21 million Bitcoin. Each Bitcoin has 100 million Satoshis. The secret to Bitcoin, the secret to it being a trustworthy unit of account, is that the decimal point can never be moved, because that's what really fiat currency is. It's a money that central planners, that politicians, when it suits their purposes, they can move that decimal point. And what happens? It expands the money supply. It expands their ability to finance wars, to finance deficit spending, to pay off voters in the short term. It's actually, when you think about it, that's all it is. It's moving the decimal point. It's so simple that it almost it kind of warps the mind just how simple it is. And all Bitcoin is, it is a technology that refuses to ever move the decimal point. It never expands the supply by diluting current holders. That's the key. Interestingly, it actually could, in theory, in the future, if we ever needed more than 100 million subunits or 100 million Satoshis within one Bitcoin, there could be a soft fork, a software update that would allow for it to be more divisible. Perhaps there could be 1 billion subunits of one Bitcoin, or 1 trillion if you required that. But by doing so, you're not diluting the current holders. It's like a stock split. Everyone still owns the same percentage of the pie. And that really is the magic of Bitcoin. It is merely a decimal point applied to absolute scarcity that even nation states cannot move. It is an absolute decimal point relative to absolute scarcity that refuses to move, that will never move, that is eternal. It is almost as if Satoshi Nakamoto discovered the form of absolute scarcity in the Platonic realm of ideas. He found that form, that idea of absolute scarcity, and he built a technological bridge that allowed us to connect to it and then to overlay a grid upon it. And then that grid was subdivided into 21 million points, and then those 21 million points into 100 million. 21 million Bitcoin, 100 million Satoshis in each of these grids. It's as if Bitcoin is this technology that allows us to access the radical stability provided by a grid or a ledger that is based upon the idea of absolute scarcity, and not just our conception of the idea, but it's as if it actually reaches into another world, into the world of forms. Now, this is actually a topic that I would like to explore in the future. Did Satoshi Nakamoto invent Bitcoin, or did he discover it? Now, I don't want to take away from him the genius of his invention, because in a sense he absolutely did invent Bitcoin, yes. But there's another way of looking at it. There's another perspective that perhaps suggests that he discovered Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin was waiting there to be discovered. Now, I don't want to get too philosophical, because as I stated, I want to be to be grounded in the practical idea of thinking in bits and sats. First of all, we all have crypto apps on our phone. We all track how much Bitcoin we have, and we track the price, and we check it every day. You need to switch the way you track Bitcoin to denominate it in Bitcoin. Now, this is key. This is critical. When you only look at the amount of Satoshis and bits in Bitcoin that you own, the fiat price, which is the fluctuating and inflating measure against which Bitcoin is compared, becomes totally irrelevant, precisely because it is untrustworthy, precisely because it is fluctuating. You don't care about it. You discard the measuring tape that is defective, and you start to only refer to the measuring tape, to the unit of account that can be trusted, that is eternally static, and that is Bitcoin. So then you will see, oh, I have 1 million Satoshi, and no matter what happens to the fiat price of Bitcoin, the current price that the market demands to exchange fiat for Bitcoin, that just becomes totally irrelevant. What matters is that you have 1 million Satoshi, a claim to that portion of the ledger, a claim that will never be diluted, that will never be inflated away, that will never be confiscated. You have that piece of real estate on this island of absolute scarcity, and your percentage ownership of it will never be violated. And by checking your little phone app for the crypto, to update yourself on crypto every day, all you will ever see is this static number, 1 million Satoshi. Now, this is going to not only reinforce to you the idea that your Bitcoin holdings should be simply measured by how much Bitcoin you hold, it will also encourage you, motivate you, compel you to stack more sats. Because when you don't have that little dopamine high from seeing the fiat price of your crypto pump up, then the only way that you get that feeling of gain, that feeling of winning, that feeling of accumulation, that feeling of getting richer, the only way that you can attain it is by going out and buying, earning more Bitcoin. And the only way to do that is to provide real value to the world and then exchange it in a value for value exchange for more Bitcoin. You don't just sit there waiting for the price to go up, because you don't care about the fiat price. You only care about expanding your relative percentage ownership of the Bitcoin ledger. And the only way to do that is to stack more sats, to get more streams of income, to save more, to have a tighter budget, to not waste your money. Because now you realize that your Bitcoin savings is not inflating, regardless of what is happening with the fiat price. It's not shrinking either. If the price crashes 50%, you don't care. You don't care because your percentage holding of Bitcoin has not been affected. Now this is radical. This actually will transform the way that you approach not just Bitcoin, not just accumulating Bitcoin, but how it'll radically change the way that you save and think about what you're spending. Another really useful practice for thinking in terms of Bitcoin is, as the title of this video suggests, to think in terms of bits and sats. So the one thing with Bitcoin is it's one Bitcoin is a 1 and then 8 decimal points after it. And when you're dealing with really small amounts of Bitcoin, like the amount of Bitcoin that would be required to buy a cup of coffee, it's really difficult to think in terms of such a small number because it's 0.0000 or whatever, and you can't really think in your head in those terms. So what I like to do, I like to think in terms of bits and sats. I use bits as a replacement for dollars and sats as a replacement for cents. So there is 1 million bits in 1 Bitcoin, 100 million sats in 1 Bitcoin. So of course this means there's 100 sats in 1 bit, just as there is 100 cents in $1. If you have 125 sats, you have 1 bit and 25 sats. So it kind of, we're very used to thinking in terms of $1.50. Well, now you can think of a bit and 50 sats. Not coincidentally, I happen to believe that one day there will be the purchasing power of a bit and the purchasing power of sats will one day be equivalent to that of dollars and cents, and probably it will go beyond that. In the long run, I do believe that eventually there will have to be units smaller than sats in order to, because I think a cent needs to be the smallest unit of divisible value, and one day a sat, I believe, will be worth so much that it will need to be divided into smaller chunks so that we still have that indispensable penny, but in Bitcoin terms. This also encourages you to save, to accumulate Bitcoin on a regular basis in even like very small amounts. So if you find, money like $12 in a change jar, well, suddenly, that you're able to buy some sats with that, right? And suddenly $12 actually converting into sats, you're motivated to do so because, of course, it's the only way that your sat stack is going to increase. You'll be motivated to sell junk to accumulate more sats. So you can see how changing your thinking, changing your personal unit of account that you use, your personal universal unit of account that you apply to all of your economic thinking, will transform not just the way you accumulate Bitcoin, it will transform the way you measure economic value. It will transform your personal finances. And I believe that as more people begin to move on to the Bitcoin standard, to transform their universal unit of account from fiat dollars or euros or yen to the the universal unit of account and measure of value, Bitcoin. I think this will also transform the world. One last thought before we depart. If you're only just starting to research or explore Bitcoin and you still do not have a foot in the door, so to speak, I would say this. For much of humanity and for a good portion of the Western world, the opportunity to accumulate one Bitcoin has already come and gone. It's no longer an attainable goal. However, to be a sat millionaire is still possible, even for a waiter or someone who works minimum wage, someone who works at a grocery store, or who works manual labor, or who works at a warehouse. You can be a sat millionaire. You can have 1 million sats. It's still possible. It's entirely attainable. It only is a couple $1,000s for now. Start thinking in bits and sats now. Start denominating your labor and your savings in Bitcoin now. Accumulate that first million sats. I believe that one day, even that will be largely unattainable for 99% of humanity. Start thinking in terms of bits and sats now, because it may well be the case in the future that you do anyways. But the difference, of course, will be between those who accumulated historically significant amounts of sats and bits in Bitcoin before the governments and institutions and the wealthy and the billionaires and the oligarchs and the elites did. Just remember, there's only about 250,000 sats per person in the world. And that's only if they were equitably divided. And we all know that wealth is never equitably divided.